Good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Robinson. I'm one of the Preparing for Adulthood team at NDTI, and I'm very pleased to say that we have. This is our. Could you turn the recording on for us, Rebecca? Thanks.
Yeah, it's on.
Thank you. That this is the third of our age and stage events, which was, I think it was that Pat Bullen who suggested that we might do age and stage, actually. And no, it was good. It was a good suggestion. And back in July last year, we had a session on how we can interpret preparing for adulthood in the early years and how we can apply it, and that was just a fantastically inspiring session. I think people will agree. We heard some really good stuff on that day. Then we had another one back in the autumn where we were focusing on secondary years, so sort of 11 to 16 particularly, and today we'll be thinking about post 16, and I'm very pleased to welcome four different speakers who are going to be presenting different aspects of the Preparing for Adulthood agenda. And we're going to kick off this morning with Ben Taylor, Catherine Lynch and Kirsty Evans, who are going to be talking to you about, oh no, I've missed the Slido. Oh, Rebecca, I'm so not on it, am I? Rebecca, would you mind putting up a Slido? We've got a question for you. And we'd like you to, just in 3 words, just say what you think a good life would look like for a young person, or a good life. What does a good life look like for anybody? Okay, so hopefully we'll get some key things coming out, lots of consensus, I hope. Okay, Slido's up now. So what does a good life look like? You can go to slido.com at PFA 10, or you can hold your phone up to that QR code and hopefully it'll take you to the site.
There's a link in the chat.
You're so slick with this now. Somebody's already there, full of fun. You have to go to Shropshire for that. That's right, it was a little joke earlier about fun in Shropshire. Okay. Loving, fulfilling, meaningful, connected, joyful, happy. Big word, happy. Lots of you say happy. A good life feels like a happy life. Yeah. So I guess one of the questions then is, what makes us happy? And we'll all be different, won't we? Healthy. Yes, it's hard to have a good life if you're not feeling healthy. Fulfilled, yes, it's hard to feel fulfilled some days, isn't it? Yeah, empowered, yes, good words here coming out.
Yeah, I like that.
Relationships, yeah, so yeah, we all need meaningful relationships, don't we? Somebody who's close to us and can confide in and share things with, the good moments, the bad moments. Free, sense of freedom. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, we've not felt a lot of that really in the last 2 years, have we?
No, empowered is another one, Carol.
Yeah. Yeah, mentally fit. Yeah, now that's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, I mean that's part of health, isn't it? Feeling, yeah, you have to have some energy. You know, if you're not feeling great, you feel a bit down, it's hard to have the energy to do other things as well. Independent. Yeah, keep adding. Oh, safe. A sense of belonging. Yeah. Job satisfaction. Yes, yes, that sort of. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, hopefully that gets us in the groove for the next session, which is going to be talking about person-centred planning to gain young people's views and develop a programme at Westminster School. And I will now hand over to Ben Taylor and Catherine Lynch and Kirsty Evans, and I think Kirsty and Catherine are together. So we get, the dynamic duo together. Fantastic. Thank you. So, Ben, are you sharing the slides?
Well, Rebecca, the one I've sent you earlier is no different. So are you all right to put the slides up, or?
Yeah, I can do that for you. One sec.
Is that right?
Take a moment to load. So. There we are.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so so good to see everybody. My name is Ben Taylor. I'm the deputy head teacher at the Westminster School, and Catherine and Kirsty are our EPs. We are extremely lucky to have them, and we just wanted to talk to you today really about how in September we opened a specialist college with 9 students. I'll come on to that in a minute, but talking about how we've really looked at things called MAPS and how we can use person-centered planning in order to help develop the curriculums for each student. And what I want to sort of emphasize is this is not us saying we've got it perfect, because we are at the start of a very long journey, but we thought we would share our findings so far, but also see how anyone else might be looking to get information from our young people, from their young people. It'd be really useful to sort of share, and it's really good to see the little mind map earlier of all those things that we think are really important for a fulfilled life. And I think from looking at that, you know, a fulfilled life can only happen if young people are listened to. So that's something that we're feeling very strongly about at the school. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, so we basically, obviously COVID has had a massive impact on everybody, and each school has had to look at how it's had an impact on them. The main thing for us was the impact that it had in terms of just pushing our young people back in terms of being able to be ready for meaningful employment in the first instance, but that also leads to independence. So the opportunity to be able to develop independent travel, for example. So we looked at it and thought, what's our COVID strategy? So we thought, why not? We'll go big. We'll just open a college. You know, so they've missed out on 18 months of their life, and a really important bit. So actually, let's keep them for longer and work really, really hard and use our business partnerships in order to give our young people, young adults now, the opportunity to catch up. So yeah, so a lot of work went into that. So we opened in September to 9 students in our first pilot year. It is on the same campus as the school, and the young people were with us. All 9 were with us at the school, left into year 14 and have come into our college, specialist college provision. So students have designed their own space. So they've got 2 rooms. They've got a common room and a learning workspace, and they've been instrumental in designing that. They've also wanted a vending machine, so they've got a vending machine that's accessible to all our staff and to them, and that's their sort of social enterprise venture as well. They're responsible for topping it up, checking the accounts and all that sort of stuff. Courses include the Duke of Edinburgh, so some of the students weren't able to do their college, that do their Duke of Edinburgh Gold expedition, so they'll have the opportunity to do that. And we've also got ASDAN personal development programs that sit alongside it, as well as functional skills in English and maths. We use the Skills Builder tool. I'm not sure if many of you are aware of the Skills Builder tool, but we use that as a bit of an assessment method, and it also helps them set targets that they review each week and review their progress towards that. And students are in the process of creating their own Naturally Talented Me profile. So if you've not come across Naturally Talented Me, I would recommend that you have a look and see how that works, because they really enjoy that. It's a very visual representation of the progress that they're making, and it can be shared with employers. Students have got their own social enterprise ventures, as I say, with they're currently doing a trash to treasure project, but they're also doing looking after the vending machine on site, and they complete group work experience at a local charity, and they really, really enjoy that and making a community contribution. But they've also got their own work placements with 3 students completing supported internships. One student, I think I presented the last time that I came here with Peter Bates, mentioned about Kenny. He's absolutely smashing life with ground control, and he's looking to start his apprenticeship in March, which is incredible. Really pleased. And we continue to have strong links with businesses, especially Wolverhampton University, where some of the students are placed. The Gap Centre in West Bromwich, and then also our large business partnerships include Ground Control, Blackmores, Autograph Catering, and DPD. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context, but I'm going to hand over to Kirsty and Catherine, who are going to talk very much about how, yes, we've got these curriculums in place, but how we've been listening to our young people and the process that we've gone through in order to support us to put a curriculum together for each of them. So Kirsty and Catherine, you okay to take over?
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant.
Lovely, thank you. Very quickly, I'm Catherine. It's Kirsty. Okay. We started with person-centred planning. It sits kind of within our core values as an organisation. So we did some work with the staff in general and then with SLT, just to kind of consider values and realign, I think, really. And actually, it's been a really useful exercise. It's helped us to define what our values are as an organisation and identified that young people are an integral part of decision-making processes, actually. And we're trying to challenge examples of things being done to our young people and our students, rather than these narratives of having no choice, really. And we've discovered that that's quite a strong thing for many of them, that they've had experiences of things being done to them. And so we're trying to use person-centred planning processes which build on some of the approaches that kind of come from the inclusion movement of Pierpoint and Forrest, Carl Rogers with person-centredness, and Wilson and Newton from Inclusive Solutions. And some of the approaches use some of the kind of narrative therapy as a basis, really. Okay, thank you. So we're very keen to kind of hear authentic voices in our work, and we chose action plans as a means of gaining voices, and this needed us to do some preparation, really, with the students, and also to gain informed consent. And we talked a lot about this in our external supervision with our supervisor, about kind of gaining voices, and it also ties in with a lot of the reading that we've been doing as well around community psychology. So it's very much about not only hearing what our students have to say, but also some of the issues around social change and what life is like for them authentically, really. And obviously this in mind for preparing for adulthood. Okay. So we have some examples here. We have consent from our students to show you two of their maps. Obviously the parts that are blocked out have personal details, which they were quite clear that they obviously didn't want to share with you. But that's just to give an idea of that were produced in the course of these meetings. And the meetings have a clear structure that we kind of work through. And because of the learning needs of our students, we also produce some prompt cards to help them, just to kind of give a bit of a sense of reassurance as well, really, but so they also knew what to expect. And before we did the map with each student, obviously we gained consent from them, and they chose who they wanted to attend from both college and who they wanted to attend from home. And at the end of each process, each one took roughly an hour and a half. We gained some feedback from each of them as well. Right, so those are the visuals anyway of the maps. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready now.
If you can just skip to slide 6, please. Thank you. So in the maps, we sat down with the young people. We sat down with their support staff member that they'd chosen from school, and we sat down with any family members that they'd invited. And this slide is a bit of a summary, really, of our findings from the map. So generally, there's a clear structure with a map, which stands for making an action plan, and it involves talking about what's important to them and what their dreams are and what their goals are, and we do a bit of action planning. In the first meeting, it was a really interesting one. There was a very clear shift for the dad of the young person in the first meeting, where he acknowledged that he has an important role in promoting independence, and that potentially previously, because of his want to protect his young person, he hasn't always stepped back and allowed that independence, which was really great to see him transition throughout the meeting. In the second meeting, adults very much helped to guide the meeting. So the young person's mum was quite resistant, again from a place of protection and wanting to keep her child safe. She was resistant to promote independence, and was kind of highlighting that she wanted skills to be developed, but was resistant to taking some steps that would allow those goals to be achieved, I think it's safe to say. In the third meeting, the young person was really able to contribute to her making an action plan. The adults did a great job at stepping back and allowing the young person's voice to be heard, which was wonderful. And so it felt like we actually got quite an authentic voice. But as you'll see, the experiences throughout the maps were quite different, so it wasn't as positive for some of the young people. So in the fourth meeting, the young person was able to contribute pretty well to his meeting. It seemed quite an authentic voice, but there were also concerns raised from the family, and there was a gap identified really between the young person's aspirations and then what family felt to be reality. And that's something that just anecdotally has come up in conversations previously with us. In the next meeting, the young person was able to really contribute to his map. However, it was so positive. He wasn't able to share any of his worries about the future. And so we were really mindful of that kind of social desirability element. So is he just telling us what he thinks we need to hear? And we're going to reflect on power later on in relation to that. In one of the other meetings, that the young person required quite a high level of scaffolding, and that was similar, I think, for the last three meetings actually. So very much led by adults, and information had to be kind of checked out with the young person then. So there's a lot of thinking around kind of dynamics with family members and social desirability, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. If you could just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we got some feedback from the young people about their meetings. We highlighted from the beginning that we wanted to be really robust with this process. So we gained the consent, we had the meetings, and we gained feedback from the young people. And actually we had some lovely feedback. So some young people spoke about liking that opportunity to talk about things. And they were generally pleased with the format of the meetings and the way things had gone. And I mean, as you can see here, overwhelmingly positive feedback, really. If you could just go to the next slide, please. We asked the young people if there's anything they'd change about their MAP meetings. And generally there were things around, I would have liked to have had more people there with me, so Mr so-and-so and Mr so-and-so and Mr so-and-so from school, and I'd like a cold drink and things. But with regards to the meeting format, the young people felt that that was okay, and that they were happy with that. Although one young person said that he thought that the way that we'd created the visual, so it was mapped out on a big piece of paper with coloured pens, he felt that needed to be neater, and that was in line with his views about how things need to be presented. So when we've met with him previously, we've been very mindful to take that on board. If you could just go to the next slide, please. We asked the young people if it had been helpful, and they all said it had been. And there was some really nice feedback from them. So one said it's given me more support and independence and information about my future and given me trust and everything. And I thought that was a really nice one. But again, we were mindful that historically we haven't always given the young people in the school and college such a voice, and we were very mindful that actually it might have meant that the feedback was not necessarily authentic, and there's definitely something we need to do there over time to ensure that we are getting really authentic feedback from our young people about these processes, so that we can use that to inform future planning.
So as we've already touched on,
next slide please.
Sorry. Thank you. As we've already touched on, in kind of gaining voices, we're very aware of power, and what we've discovered actually is that our students seem to have few experiences of being listened to, and I mean really listened to, and so I think that came as a little bit of a shock to them. I think in a couple of the meetings they were a little bit surprised, and consequently a little bit reluctant maybe to share things possibly. And some of the topics, there were some consistent themes across topics, actually, across maps. And some of these were around kind of social situations and assertiveness. So those themes around kind of anxiety about social situations came up quite a lot, and kind of worrying about maybe what other people would think and fitting in. And we also, when we really thought about this, we felt that there was a strong theme around social desirability, as Kirsty's already touched on, that some of the responses were very much because they thought that that's what the adults wanted to hear. We also reflected, actually, would they have told us if they hated the meeting? And we felt probably no, actually, they're too polite. And it's made us really reflect on the power that we have, and kind of how we deal with that kind of imbalance really, and what we need to do in the future going forward. Next slide please. Okay, so some of our reflections on the process, there are some real positives. We feel that it's necessary and holistic, because having a real person-centred process really helps us to get a good understanding of the student and their needs and what's going on for them. And obviously from a human rights perspective, that's incredibly important. It gives us very rich information, and I think with that rich information comes great responsibility. It allows us to highlight gaps in their skills, and this has also been the purpose of the meeting. Actually, has also been, you know, we can see what they're like in the meeting. We can get a sense of, you know, how they present and what are the needs there might be that we might not have seen before potentially. And it allows us to kind of see how within the family, how things work, what the dynamics are, and where potentially adults are positioned regarding skills and promoting independence. There's been a little bit of a tension around kind of safety and independence, those kinds of issues, and it's been really interesting just kind of seeing what that looks like within the family, and has given us a lot of food for thought really about how we can support the students in the future, and with that, and support their families. Next slide please. Thank you. Our reflections around the process, we really do recognise that we need to start earlier with young people, giving them a voice and a sense of autonomy, because this has been a huge jump for some, and we recognise there's a lot of work to do, there really is, and so starting much lower down the school, we need to put the foundations in, and potentially there's a huge piece of work around the curriculum as well that we need to support and develop. We recognise that we need to do some work with families and how to manage that kind of protection and independence dichotomy. We've been having a think that we probably need to design and deliver some workshops around how to promote independence while maintaining safety. We had this in the diary a couple of times and unfortunately has had to be cancelled due to COVID, but fingers crossed it is coming up soon and hopefully that will go ahead. We've used PATH as well, and that's a very similar kind of planning tool in a little bit more detail. That's Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. And we, again, that still to do, but that's just kind of support curriculum planning, and it's to help us to think about with key staff the bigger picture and how to empower adults to help the students. It's also to help break down kind of aspirations, goals and skills, and to create action plans. We also think that we need to strike a balance for the young people with them, in partnership with them, for identifying who they want in their MAP meetings. Most identified somebody whose company they enjoy, who they get on well with, that they really like. But what we discovered was it's not necessarily the most appropriate person to guide them through kind of thinking for the future and next steps. So there's a bit of thought that needs to go into that and a little bit of work as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's a challenging one, isn't it? Because this everything we're talking about is about voices and it's about autonomy, but actually there's that fine line really about giving them voices and autonomy, but then having the people in the meeting to support them who know them the best. So I think we're going to have to think really carefully about how we manage that in future. Next slide, please. Thank you. Can you see the slide that says since the maps? Is that where everyone's at now? Fabulous. Thank you. As Catherine's already said, one of the key themes that emerged through all of the MAP meetings was around anxiety. So all of the young people either presented with some anxiety in the meeting that then we could kind of pick up on with them, or label that they had some anxiety in social situations. So new people, new contexts, doing new activities. So on the back of that, we've done some work with the young people around anxiety. So we did a kind of an initial session, which was more about helping us to better understand their needs and how we could personalise things for them, where we mapped out where we feel anxiety in our bodies, and so we created a visual for them that we've given back to the young people that they developed, that was about what anxiety feels like for them. Then we were able to kind of identify how we could personalise the next session for them, and what we decided to do was we drew on a narrative approach and an externalising activity. So in the second session around anxiety, I was wearing my anxiety hat, and we encouraged the young person to ask me questions. So we gave them questions that we developed in the form of cue cards that they could choose, and they also had the options to ask me additional questions. So the sorts of questions that I was asked included things like, what are you? How are you different to other emotions? What makes you stronger? What makes you weaker? Will you ever go away? Who do you like to target? Those sorts of things, really. And what we found was that through that externalising activity, where I took the role of anxiety, the young people were actually really engaged on the whole, weren't they?
They were very good.
And we finished that session by thinking about strategies. So one of the final questions was around what makes anxiety weaker, which led to us thinking about strategies. And on the back of that, we gave lots of options to the young people about things that they'd like to learn more about. And we've had some feedback from them about things that they want to focus on in the next session. So the young people want more information about how they can use affirmations and gratitude, and how they can kind of use more fun and positive emotion as a bit of an antidote to anxiety. So those were the ones that the majority of the young people chose, and a couple of the young people chose to for us to talk about how to work with our thoughts and use our thoughts as a way into to challenge our anxiety. So some work around helpful and unhelpful thoughts and challenging those thought processes. So we've got some sessions planned with the young people to address the things that they've asked for. We've also done some further work around continuing to gain the young people's voices. So I did some work with one of the young people, the young person who actually we felt was quite authentic in her meeting and was really able to contribute. I've met with her since, and we developed some statements. Could you just go to the next slide, please? So the themes that we thought were important were around having a voice, autonomy, strengths and achievements, view of self and view of the world. So we developed some statements that related to each of those themes. So things like, I am listened to, people want to hear my opinions, I am able to make my own choices, I have control over decisions in my life, I know what I'm good at, I am different to others, I am the same as others, people respect me, people treat me unfairly, those sorts of things really. And what I did was I worked with the young person to sort those statements based on whether she agreed with them or disagreed with them. Again, we gained consent for that work, and then she was able to do that. But there were a lot of reflections that I will talk about, but in the first instance, I'd like to just show you some of the quotes from our discussion. And again, I've gained the young person's consent to share these quotes with you. If you could just go to the slides entitled quotes, please. So one of the statements was, others listen to what I've got to say, and the young person was able to say, no, they don't listen at all. And when I asked kind of who it was, they said it's everyone, they're not listening to me. We determined that was in school. And I said, who doesn't listen? And she said, nobody, to be honest, they just don't listen to me properly. I told them to listen and they're just ignoring me. And she spoke about that making her feel sad, and when I asked her what she wanted to be different, she said she wants to talk to them, she wants to explain to them sometimes, but she said, but they are interested in me no more. And so that gave a real insight into how she's thinking at the moment, and that was specifically about her peers. So I think there's something there that we can work with around how the young people work together and how they can hear each other's voices, and that's going to be an important part of the process going forward. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. One of the statements was, I can tell others how I feel. And she identified that it's a bit tricky, and she told me that she was upset yesterday. And as you can see, all of these statements, in order to get kind of rich information, they required a lot of scaffolding in order to kind of unpick what the young person was trying to say. But through quite a bit of questioning, she was able to tell me that it's really hard to tell others how she feels, and that she feels shy sometimes, and that if she tells the teacher, the other kids might hear, so she has to go into another room and get some privacy. I really feel that I wouldn't have been able to have got this really rich information from this person without using that card sorting activity in the first instance, because what I found previously with her is that with kind of more broad open questions, she doesn't know where to go with them, and she can clam up. So the cards seem to help us to get in, give us a bit of a focus really, so that we could really hear more authenticity in her voice. Next slide, please. I mean, this one's another example of kind of how her experiences with her peers. So she very much is talking here about peers winding her up, and it upsetting her again. I won't go into too much detail here. So if you could just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there's lots of learning and reflections from this work around trying to gain authentic voices. I noticed that there's a lot that we need to do around the statements and the cards that we use. So initially, when we put the statements together, we generated some positively worded statements and some negatively worded statements. And actually, what we found in reality was that the negatively worded statements were too difficult, particularly for that young person to get a head round. So if it was a statement like "I don't fit in," and then that was a disagree, it really baffled her. So there's going to be a fine line, I think, going forward in ensuring that we're not being too leading. And that was why I didn't want to go with just positively framed statements, because I wanted to give options so that I wasn't leading too much. But then also ensuring understanding, and so I think that's something we need to continue to reflect on. And this is going to be different for each individual young person that we work with, so it just shows the importance of clearly personalised tools when we're working with young people. Next slide, please.
Okay, so there's a lot of learning for us to do, and we have some thoughts about where we might go with this. We have recognised that we want to do more work around pupil voice, certainly in post 16 and then post 19. We're going to use themes to inform our approaches. So some of the things that have already come up will help us with the planning around this. So it will inform how we go about gaining voices, but also the kinds of things that we need to include in the curriculum, certainly in post 16, but then across the whole school as well. And these are the things like preparing them to be able to give their voices and for adults to hear those. And there'll be some real opportunities, I think, in our curriculum development. With that, there's ongoing thinking about the barriers to gaining these voices as well, whether those might be individual differences. It could be around kind of language and communication needs as well, around being able to be assertive and have confidence in their views. And at the minute, we think that might include kind of support through mentoring and practice and so on to develop the skills for presenting. Other factors that we need to think about and we need to work with are family dynamics and how we can support families with this as well as around expectations. We found that in the maps, some families had very different expectations for their young people that the college staff had. And it's about what we do with that and how we make sure that kind of aspirations are realistic, but also, you know, do reflect potential. And we need to work with others a lot to challenge and to begin to change the systems as well. One of the things that we've talked about at length so far is about young people attending meetings. We've realised that very few have with their education, health and care plan annual reviews. And we're trying to look at that, and apparently this week we've had some young people who have attended their meetings, and that's been very successful. But there needs to be some training for young people and support so that they can do that, and do that rather than just being passive, that they can take an active part in those meetings. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we have some slightly bigger plans. As I said, we've been a little bit scuppered by COVID, but you know, we're not going to let that put us off. We're very keen to write up our research findings kind of formally and then less formally, and blog about it as well. Be very interested in that. We feel that there may be a role for kind of restoring some of the narratives that we've heard so far, for kind of seeing if there are alternative stories, potentially more positive. And I think there will be some challenges with that potentially, but I think there's good learning there. We very much want to be doing a lot more in terms of training and workshops for families to support their understanding. We have several in the diary, so hopefully COVID and all, we can go ahead with that. And then there's ongoing curriculum planning and using kind of other person-centred planning tools and potentially developing our own as well, we'd hope to do. Thank you. Right, that's it from us. Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you so much, both of you. What a great presentation and very, very interesting stuff. So I'm going to hand over to Ruth because I can see she's got her hand up.
Hello, Sandwell people.
Hello, Birmingham people.
My ex-colleagues, thank you for that. It was so inspiring and I took so much out of it. I think one of the it's kind of a comment, kind of a question, but we're trying to implement vocational profiling here, which is similar to the MAPS idea. And I'm really keen to make it student voice. And I've had a template that I designed and I gave it to them all. And it's the bit about identifying the things that they need help with in the workplace and what helps them with those things. And I've just felt like I've been banging my head against a brick wall. They just find it so difficult to articulate what they find difficult and then what they then need in, obviously they don't know what they need in place, but I don't, I could easily just type that all out and send it to the employer, but I just feel like that's a complete cheat. It's got to be the young person's voice because they're going to be the ones that are going to be employed, hopefully, in the long run. So I really liked what you were saying about using those statements and kind of breaking it down and really trying to help them to, like you said, with the girl that you were doing the one-to-one stuff with, Kirsty, it's almost like warming her up to be able to then have that conversation, because it's a really hard thing to admit that you find something really hard. So they're not inclined to say, oh gosh, I really struggle with X. So I think I'm definitely going to take that away and look at how I can, use those tools in a different way for what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd recommend kind of revisiting the statements throughout. I found with that young person that initially she would say just yes or no, and she might kind of add a little bit more, but all of the things I developed were kind of over time. So we were able to revisit the statements initially, sort them, add a little bit, and then I would go back to key ones afterwards. And I felt that with some of them, I had to kind of go back to them 3 or 4 times in order to get something out of her that was that felt meaningful, because she's just a little bit resistant, and that kind of reflects all of her previous experiences. So I'd allocate quite a bit of time so that you can go back and continue to revisit things if that's kind of important for particular individuals.
Thank you. And just to say, it's so exciting to see so much intensive work being done with Post 16 in Sandwell.
Yeah. Thank you. We love it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ruth. Ben, I think you've got your hand up. Probably.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of emphasise the potential impact that the work that Kirsty and Catherine are doing with our young people for the whole school. I mean, I'll give you an example. I did an assembly with 40 post-16 students a few weeks ago, following the work that Kirsty and Catherine had done a couple of months ago, and just waved an EHCP in front of them. And I said, put your hand up if you know what this is. This is an EHCP. Put your hand up if you know what it is. And maybe 2 out of the 40 put their hand up, and that was really damning for me as a senior leader in our organisation. That's not right. And the only 2 that put their hand up is because they had a meeting about it in the morning, and the thought of having young adults or young people having a document all about them and them not knowing about it is quite damning. So as an organisation, we're very keen to ensure that nearly all the students, if appropriate, join their EHCP meeting, make a meaningful impact on that meeting. But in order to do that, we need to give them the skills and the confidence to be able to do that. So it's training them up and within our curriculum, giving them the confidence to present to others or to speak to another person or to contribute to a meeting, even if it's setting it up, a mock meeting, and starting that from a sort of year 7 upwards, because I just you know, and then even some of the language that's used in the EHCPs, you know, I read some of them and it's, you know, so and so is not yet able to, so and so is not yet able to. Well, if I'm reading that and I read that about myself, you know, if it was performance management and Benny's yet able to run a school, I'd be I'd be a bit upset. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around it. So, you know, so we have our post 16 students, they have an opportunity to present to others, you know, every Friday afternoon, but present about their EHCP and the progress they're making towards those statements in their EHCP. So they will actually come to the front and say, you know, so one put a presentation together, because some kids love PowerPoint, don't they? We all do. You know, that they put together a presentation of how they'd started work at the university, and they were really proud of it, and they could talk about it. And then their communication skills develop, because if they're talking about something they're interested in and something that they're good at, those communication skills are only going to improve. So, like I said at the start, this is not us saying we're getting it perfectly right. This is just the start of a very long journey, and I'm mindful that, you know, I've come to these forums and talked about employment, but actually, you know, this is really, really important, because they need to have an authentic voice to go on to, you know, a meaningful employment opportunity that they want to do, that they've been listened to. I mean, I went into one of those MAP meetings and I reflect on my behaviour in that meeting, because I wanted the best for that young person, that I was slightly overpowering, and I left it thinking, oh God, that was not the, do you know what I mean? So it's a whole culture shift and a whole sort of mentality shift for us as an organisation. So I just wanted to add to that in terms of those closing comments.
Thank you.
Thank
Let's come to Hafsha, who's also got a hand up, and then there is a question in the chat, and then we can quickly move on, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I don't want to kind of extend it. I just really want to build on that point, really. Just thanks so much for a really powerful presentation. And for colleagues who don't know me, I'm here with a presentation a little bit later on from NHS England, the Learning Disability and Autism programme in the Midlands, to talk particularly about health. But what you said to me absolutely resonated for us in terms of thinking about engaging children, young people in their health. I'll be talking a little bit later on about annual health checks, but absolutely, you know, it's so critical. I've recently, I've just spent 18 months actually involved in quite an extensive review, sadly, into a death of an individual who died at the age of 47 in 2017, an individual with a learning disability. And we mapped his life all the way back to pretty much when he was born. And what was really, really sad and depressing, I guess, is that of the thousands and thousands and thousands of records we pulled over, we were looking at his daily observation records. His voice was missing. You know, there was nothing about who he was, his ambitions. All we did was see a collation of medical problems, issues, behavioural issues. You know, you couldn't see who he was. As soon as we started the process, we started with his family to understand who he was. And you wouldn't know that this was a hugely articulate individual, an artist. He you know, his art, if you look at his artwork, it's, you know, won awards. He was hugely talented and able individual, and because actually we weren't listening to him, you know, through his course, and we could see back to his school reports actually, you know, we did a huge disservice to him. We didn't enable him to live the life he wanted. And I was reflecting powerfully actually as you were speaking about Clive, the individual I'm thinking of, in terms of how important it is. So not really a question, but a comment. And thanks so much for that presentation. I'll certainly be thinking about taking that back into our work.
Thank you, Hafsha.
Thank you.
Well, there is a comment from Catherine in the chat, which is it possible to get the cards, or is it something that you have developed?
It's something we developed. So we can share with you the themes and some of the statements that we included, but I'd recommend that you consider your own statements depending on the young people that you're working with, if that makes sense.
Is that okay, Catherine?
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say we generally tailor the communication to the person's needs, so I would imagine one set of cards is not going to suit everybody. So I just wondered if there was cards that we could sort of purchase to get young people's views, but we'd obviously tailor it to that individual. But what you suggested would be really helpful if if we could have maybe if I could have a copy of the slides afterwards, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the slides will be available to everybody after today, so they will get sent out automatically if you're signed up for today. Eleanor, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. I just wanted to say, really, I suppose reflecting a little bit as a bit of background, I'm an educational psychologist as well, and always taken a lead on preparation for adulthood and been linked with mainstream colleges for years now. And it was just so interesting to kind of reflect on the differences that these young people are having at Westminster and moving into that kind of setting with their voice, their authentic voice being right at the heart of that journey. Because what I see with that transition from secondary to the mainstream college for young people, sometimes with really high level needs as well, is so much information just gets lost on the way. It just doesn't make it to that receiving setting. And I think what's so wonderful to hear from Westminster is it seems to me like everybody wants to do this, every setting wants to do this, wants to have the voice of the child right in the middle of everything that they're doing, but get a little bit overwhelmed with where to start. And I like that you've just started. You just went in, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give it a try. And as you said, Ben, it's now very much growing, and it's the roots are going to come further down in the school. It's going to go into the curriculum. And it sounds like you just took a point, you went for it, really thought about it, reflected on it, and then it's going to be something that grows from there. And I think that's such an inspirational tale for other organisations who feel a bit daunted by how to do this, because it is such a huge shift. But I think there's a good lesson there in just start somewhere and it'll grow from there. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for your presentation. It just brilliant stuff. So really, and it just so reinforces our message as a team. We're always saying do it in a person-centered way, find out what really matters to the young person. You just, you know, given us some examples of how you've gone about, and it's been really creative. So thank you very much. We are now going to move on to Glenn, who has very kindly said he's going to talk about the Care Act and how it's applied in Calderdale, another lovely spot. You're going to be talking to us about how you've interpreted the 5-day offer as well, aren't you, Glenn?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Fantastic. Yeah, we can, thank you.
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure how to pitch it really, but I thought I could tell you about the 5-day offer for about 10-15 minutes, and then I can take questions if that's all right. Does that sound okay? Yeah, there's the odd nod. So I'm based up in Calderdale. So Calderdale is a small local authority in West Yorkshire. We sit alongside Kirklees and Bradford Leeds and Wakefield. We have a population of 200,000, and we are a what I'd call a traditional northern kind of mill town. You can see the kind of landscape behind me. That's Studley Pike above Todmorden. So Halifax is the main town in Calderdale. We've got about 100,000 people live there, and we've perhaps recently become a bit famous because of Gentleman Jack was filmed in Halifax, the story of Anne Lister at Shibden Hall. We have a talented writer called Sally Wainwright who also bases Happy Valley and Last Tango in Halifax in the area, so you can perhaps picture it. Well, the 5-day offer started back in 2016 because we had 27 young people aged between 18 and 25 who were in external residential college placements. So we don't have a residential college in Calderdale, and people at the time weren't happy with our local offer. And so a commissioning manager and the SEN team manager had obviously identified that, because 27 is a large number, and those placements were probably costing the authority about £75,000 per person per year, and they wanted to make things better in Calderdale. So I was asked to come and do some work. I previously worked for the authority back in 1999 to 2001. I had a contact who knew I was looking for some work because I was going to get made redundant from the youth service in Huddersfield. I'd also previously spent 6 years with Keyring, who were a national charity supporting people with learning disabilities to live independently. And I've kind of got a background of my degrees recreation management. I then worked in a long stay hospital in Wakefield. I've predominantly worked with people with learning disabilities and young people throughout my career. And I needed a job, so I knew someone in the council who knew what I could do, and they got me to come over and start doing some work in Calderdale, which is the place where I grew up. So I've sort of spent half my life in Halifax, and I now live in Huddersfield. So they asked me to basically work with a small pilot group of young people, 4 students from our SEN high school and 4 students from another school who has a sixth form with SEN provision, and those students they'd been identified as people who were going to progress from school into our local college. So we just have one FE college in Calderdale, and the course that those students were going to be doing is called Employability and Life Skills, which a lot of young people in Calderdale do when they move on. But it's the 3.5 days a week. So those young people had sort of a day and a half where they weren't at college and they probably wanted to do something, or mum and dad might want them to do something because mum and dad were at work. And so I was asked to spend some time with the young people and kind of mirror the conversation you were having before I joined, which was around being person-centred, getting to know young people, you know, and then helping them achieve what they wanted to do. We used our adult education provision in Halifax as kind of somewhere for people to start. So if their day off college was a Thursday, we'd look at what kind of adult ed classes there were on a Thursday and if they'd be interested in doing them. And some people did take up those classes, so doing sort of ICT or art or a bit more English or some arts and crafts, sort of personal development stuff. And then other people didn't want to do that, so that's when I did some work with them and did things like perhaps support them to go to the gym and learn how to use the gym, or meet a friend to do an activity, have a game of badminton, or perhaps look at volunteering or even part-time paid work on those days off. So what I did over that summer of 2016 was develop my network in Calderdale with leisure services, with the local volunteer agency, with anyone and everyone who had anything to do with volunteering or work, or got to know people at the job centre. And I was just really nosy, I guess, going and finding out loads of stuff and building a really good network. And so what we found from spending time with the young people and getting to know them was absolutely what I'm sure everybody in this meeting knows, and that is that most young people would like to perhaps have a job, have a relationship, possibly get married, have somewhere nice to live, some friends, and enough money to live off, and lead a life. So that's just like anybody else. So I don't find that a particularly hard sell when I'm speaking with commissioners or doing presentations to the great and the good councillors and other people, because I'm just saying that, yes, young people with learning disabilities would like to have what everybody else has. So that's not rocket science. And by continuing to spend time with young people over the years, that message just keeps coming through loud and clear. And so because people within the school and the college and social services seem to like what I'd done with the pilot project, they wanted to extend it. So although I was just being paid as an external consultant at the time, which sounds fancy, but it's basically a 0 hours contract, we extended it. But there were no marketing materials, there was no referral process, there wasn't any of that because it had been a pilot. So we looked at perhaps formalising it a bit, and we did a GDPR compliant referral form, which is dead easy, you know, name, address and a few contact details. We put some criteria down for the kind of people I might work with in the future, which was young people aged 18 to 25 with an EHC plan, with a learning disability resident in Calderdale who were looking for something to do on their days off. And it kind of developed then over the next academic year. And I started to also work with some people who were still considering external residential colleges. But by doing partnership working with the local college to improve their course, and the local SEN school and the other school with the SEN vocational skills sixth form, we kind of were able to spend time with people and help them understand what was available in Calderdale, and those kind of requests for external residential colleges started to decrease, and now 6 years down the line we only have one person at an external residential college. So we did have 27. So there's been a lot of hard work there. But what I would say is that we haven't set up lots of new projects or groups or anything like that. It's been more of me perhaps networking and letting people know what's available. So that was a big thing that came out, I suppose, from this work, was that people didn't know what was available in Calderdale. And by me going and perhaps doing a home visit, or perhaps joining someone's EHC plan, or meeting a parent in Halifax, or the young person, I was able to let them know what was available, and so people seem to have been much more comfortable now with what you can do in and around the local area, and so those requests for external college placements have pretty much disappeared. the key things I think about the 5-day offer, or the work that I do, because I do other stuff as well as it, but is really getting to know the person and spending time with people. So on a weekly basis, I normally visit our local FE college course and students. I normally visit Ryburn, which has the SEN provision in the sixth form, and I normally visit Spring Hall at Ravenscliffe, which is our SEN high school. So I visit those places every week, and I join in with lessons, and I join in with break and lunch, and I get to know the students when they're generally in years 12, 13 and 14. And so then when they move on, they know who I am and how I can help them. So I'm not just some random man who turns up and says, what do you want to do on your days off college? And I think that's really key, because it means that mums and dads can get to know me and young people can get to know me. I work alongside a careers advisor, I work alongside social workers, I work alongside teachers, I work alongside the person who does the voluntary action Calderdale, you know, so I know lots of people in Halifax, and we're a relatively small authority in Calderdale, so you can kind of get to know pretty much most people who do everything. I appreciate that where you all work in the Midlands, it's much bigger. I would say on average, I probably work with about 20 to 25 young people each academic year, but I don't close cases. And if, like I say, generally I work with people aged 18 to 25. If someone's 16, 17 and rings me for advice, that's not a problem. If they email me, if they want to meet up, I don't mind. I'm not sort of precious about that. I just try and be a helpful person from the local authority, because I know full well that my social work colleagues are under enormous pressure. Teaching colleagues are always under enormous pressure. My mum and dad were teachers, my sister's a teacher, my wife's a teacher. I know that, you know, teaching is really hard. And so I try and take the pressure off a bit by just being able to take the time to spend with people, and that seems to have paid dividends. So that, I suppose, one of my key take-home messages from talking about the 5-day offer in Calderdale is, if in your authority you have someone who can spend time with young people and the families, I think that makes a massive difference. I don't use person-centred planning tools, but I would say that I work in a person-centred way and have done for 25 years. You know, I'm about supporting and helping people to do what they want to do. It's not my agenda of what I think they should be doing. I never tell people what to do. I always try and sort of get out from them what they'd like to do, and then I can make appropriate suggestions and guide them. That makes my job really interesting, because I get taken down paths that I perhaps wouldn't normally, such as trying to help someone find somewhere where they can go horse riding, or doing some cooking, or, you know. But I kind of had a bit of a John Noakes role in my last job, working with young people, because I used to have to go abseiling and caving and water skiing and things, because I was a community recreation officer. So I'm kind of used to mucking in and joining in with a game of football, game of cricket, badminton, table tennis, pool, you know, and shooting the breeze with young people, as well as perhaps more serious stuff around employment and volunteering. Alongside the 5-day offer, the couple of things that we did in Calderdale to perhaps enhance it was that we didn't have any supported internships prior to 2016. We had none. And I'd kind of had about 7 or 8 years out of learning disability services, so I quickly had to get up to speed on things like Project Search and supported internships. Coincidentally, I knew Anna O'Brien, who used to oversee Project Search in Europe, because Anna had worked with me when she worked for the NDTI back in 1999. And Anne told me all about Project Search, and I thought, well, that sounds good. I went to see the one in Bradford and I liked it, and I suggested it was something we could have in Calderdale. And we did. So we set up a Project Search in 2017. So that's been running now in its 5th year. We've had 2 years massively affected by COVID. It's based down at the Calderdale Royal Hospital. We haven't hit the employment targets that I would have liked to have got, but we've had 9 young people who've secured full-time paid work through Project Search. I'd like it to be double that, but prior to that we'd none. So you know, we have had some successes, and like I say, 2 years have been massively affected by COVID. So I'm hoping that we can kick on and improve. And we also set up Gig Buddies. So if you haven't heard of Gig Buddies, that came out of Stay Up Late in Brighton, supporting people with learning disabilities to lead a full and happy life by going out and experiencing social events and not having to get back home for 9 o'clock, because that's when the staff needed to be back for a shift change. So Our Gig Buddies was going great guns with about 20 pairs of people enjoying all sorts of stuff, but sadly the host organisation went bankrupt, which was a nightmare last year. So Gig Buddies went on hold, and we're just currently trying to find a new host organisation and get some grant funding to get Gig Buddies back up and running. Some of the feedback we had from Gig Buddies when it was running was that, it might not surprise some of you, but with young people who were spending time with their Gig Buddy and doing a really enjoyable social activity and enjoyed it more than when they did something with a paid support worker, you know, which is disappointing. And I have a bit of a thing about that, because I think that if you're a person with a learning disability and the only people who ever spend time with you are paid to be with you, I think that will just have an awful impact on your self-esteem. So Gig Buddies, I thought, was fab, because it was about a shared interest, whether it was watching Halifax Town or going to watch musicals at the theatre or going to a rugby league game or going to the trades club in Ebden Bridge and watching bands. You know, it was that shared interest and that shared passion which then helped people form friendships just like anybody else. So I think that's really important. So I'm looking forward to getting Gig Buddies back up and running. Like I said, I'm looking forward to Project Search, which is our supported internship programme at the hospital, getting some more employment outcomes. I'll just refer to my notes to see if I've missed anything. I suppose I've probably had contact with about 140 young people. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've got a contact with about 140 young people over the last 6 years. And like I said, I don't close cases, so sometimes people will come back to me and I haven't heard from them for a couple of years and they'll give me an update and want to meet and pick my brains. So I think that's probably enough information. I'm more than happy for people to contact me via email and set up a Teams if you want, if you found any of that interesting. Oh, the one thing I haven't shown you is the What Next brochure. So in 2019, because people wanted information from me, and I don't particularly like reading loads of stuff off a screen, so we put this together, which is called the What Next brochure. So there's a picture of God's Power there working at the Shea, which is our local football ground. Kind of, it's going a bit blurry, but it's you can all have a copy of that if you want. I can send it on a PDF. I'm about to update it, and it's an idea I pinched from Kirklees because they have one, and it's a brochure where you can just have a look through all the different services that are available for people with learning disabilities in Calderdale, and it just kind of gives people ideas of what they might want to be thinking about when people are coming up to transition and adulthood. So Project Search is in there, the college is in there, Gig Buddies is in there, all the different community-based day opportunities or in Old Money Day services, all the different providers are in there. And I can use that as a basis for conversations with people about what they might like to do or have help with, and then I can tailor my support to them. Okay.
You make it sound so easy, Glenn. I mean, I think it's wonderful that you know, it just sounds like it's such a natural thing for you to be doing for people. But we have got quite a lot of questions for you already, so I hope you don't
fire 'em
mind.
in. That's fine. Go on then.
So a lot of them are around funding. So who funds the service for young people to access? Is it funded via social care or the SEND education bit of?
Oh, I'm salaried and I work in all age disability in the Adults and Wellbeing Directorate. So I work for Calderdale Council in Adults and Wellbeing. So it's a salaried post. And
in terms of, there's a specific question about the 5-day provision and accessing adult education. So Alison says, can I ask if you've had any challenges with young people with education, health and care plans accessing adult education on the days when they're not in college? We've been told that it conflicts funding streams and so a young person can't access both.
All right, that's not the case in Calderdale. So people have been doing that for 6 years. Sometimes we don't have loads of people with EHC plans accessing adult ed, but that's never come up. That issue has never come up. So I don't know why that's been put in as a block.
Okay. Thank you. It may be specific to our authority. Yeah. Okay. And who pays for the young person's place, whatever it is that they're doing? So some of them presumably are unpaid if you're getting somebody voluntary work or.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, so I would say that I don't work with many young people who could perhaps just volunteer without some support. I do work with some young people who, if I've supported them for a few weeks, that they can, you know, that they can volunteer and carry on with help from the people in the voluntary place. But perhaps sometimes someone might need a PA, so that's when they'd have to have a Care Act assessment, and a social worker would get involved and look at perhaps putting in some hours there, which obviously also brings in community care charges, and that's different for everybody because it depends on your financial circumstances. So trying to explain that to people who are making the transition from 17 to 18 and becoming an adult, trying to explain that to mums and dads and families is difficult, you know, in terms of how things are funded, because up to 18 most things within education are paid for, and then as someone progresses, say to college, whether it's a residential college or local college, that place is generally funded through the SEN team because they've got an EHC plan. But if they want something additional, then they'll have to have an assessment from a social worker. Pretty much all the people I work with are eligible for services, but obviously then there's a charge, and you have to make sure that people are getting the right benefits. You know, so it can get a bit tricky and a bit complicated, but normally with the help of a social worker, we can get through those, you know, that sort of navigate that.
Sharon, can I ask you, does that clarify? It sounds like most of the funding is coming from adult social care because these young people are over 18. Yes, okay, that's good.
Yeah, is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I was just interested in the fact that you work with so many young people. I wonder whether sometimes you actually do group work with them.
No, not really. No,
No.
no. I've done. When I first started out, I did a couple of walks with a couple of lads just to spend a bit of time with them because they knew each other, and
Right.
that seemed okay. I suppose me joining in with lessons in the local schools and college, you could class as group work. But I'll try and catch people just informally on breaks and things for how are you, what you're doing on your day off, do you need any help, kind of thing. Yeah, so I wouldn't, and I suppose at Adult Ed, if I go and join in with a class there, obviously it's a group of people doing cooking or arts and crafts. Or
Yeah.
So one thing I didn't mention was that we did run a summer school in 2017, 18 and 19, because we found that young people had a massive gap from college finishing sort of around the end of June to then re-enrolling in August. So sort of had about, you know, 8-9 weeks when they weren't doing much. So we did run at Adult Ed, we ran some summer school classes, which we didn't charge for them, but we ran some one on employment, one on arts and crafts. We did a cooking session. They always seem to be really popular, and I managed to get some funding through Leonard Cheshire to do some sports activities as well.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, also interested in, I don't want to hog this, but I can't see anybody with their hand up at the
yeah,
moment.
that's fine. Yeah.
But I was just wondering about, you said you worked alongside Job Centre Plus and voluntary
Yeah.
tier agency and so on. When you're thinking about employment, do
Yep.
you have access to a supported employment organisation within Calderdale?
Yeah, not great. My experiences of going to the local job centre, I can't say were particularly positive. So I tend to gravitate towards a charity in Halifax called Halifax Opportunities Trust, and they have some staff who work under contract from the DWP as an interwork programme for people with disabilities.
Right.
And so I tend to use them as my start off point, and pick their brains and help people get some support from them. No, in Calderdale, we need to develop our supported employment provision, really. You know, we don't have lots of job coaches either within the council or any other organisations. So that's something that I'm you know, there's all sorts of strands to this kind of work. I have a particular passion for employment, so I'm always banging that drum and trying to find opportunities for people.
Yeah.
It is from attending meetings like this and other PFA initiatives and things like with Learning Disability England, wherever you go in Britain, it's hard work. You know, helping someone with a learning disability to find a full-time paid job is hard work. You know, there's nowhere I found that's got the magic formula. I am a big fan of Project Search. I do think because it's, you know, it really goes for it. Project Search.
Yeah,
Does what it says on the tin.
Isn't it? It's a rigorous model of
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
which I think is really helpful in terms of ensuring that people stick to methods that work rather than trying to, you know, sort of do their own thing, which may not work.
And in the aims high, I think it's really important to aim high. To help people get jobs and not look at perhaps just carving up bits of jobs or a couple of hours a week. I think people, generally the young people I work with and adults sometimes, have far more potential than people ever give people credit for, just with the right support. And so. Yeah,
lovely. Thank you. Great to hear what you've got to say, Glenn, and thank you very much for that. Has anybody got any other questions? Because we're due for a break in just a moment, but no. I think they just made it sound so easy. I think that's the thing.
Well,
but it did sound like you got it sorted, and you know you've got a way of working in it, and it's effective. So I'm very pleased that we can now hear about another aspect of the Preparing for Adulthood agenda, which is annual health checks. And some of you know that I am very exercised when it comes to annual health checks. I think they're a great way for young people to ensure that they have good health. And I know that we were at a meeting together, weren't we, Hafsha, where we heard quite a lot of stuff about annual health checks from a parent perspective, and I think you're going to introduce some of that as well today. So I'm very pleased that you're able to join us, and I'm going to hand over to you now. Okay, thanks.
Let me just come off mute. Thank you so much for having me here today. Can you see my slides there that I've shared? Are they up on the screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Fabulous. Well, thanks so much. I know I did a bit of an intro just earlier on, but just for colleagues that might have joined since, my name's Hafsha Ali. I work for the regional NHSEI Midlands Learning Disabilities and Autism Programme. It's a bit of a mouthful. And I have been supporting the programme on health inequalities for about 2 years now. And within that programme, I've had responsibility for the annual health check programme. And I guess I'm hoping that most people will know what an annual health check is. I will talk about it a little bit more as the presentation progresses. But essentially what we've seen is that, you know, going back 2 or 3 years, the uptake of annual health checks for people with a learning disability was really quite poor. And probably around, you know, 40–50%. So most people weren't getting an annual health check. And nationally, there's been quite a massive drive through the long-term plan to improve the uptake of annual health checks, and we've been quite successful in doing so. So now the uptake of annual health checks is probably in and around the 70s, some areas 80% mark. Not good enough. We want everybody to have an annual health check, but there's been a really steep increase in the uptake, and that's come about because of the partnership work that we've been doing through our health and care systems with practices, and a real focus on looking at data and understanding who isn't and isn't getting one. Now, looking at that data, we're very mindful this year's plan. So we did a lot of that progress last year, and this year, for this year's plan, this financial year's plan, we really wanted to build on that to say, actually, that's great, but there are 2 things that we're kind of really we know we need to do more about. One is understanding the variation of who's getting them. So we are mindful that actually people from a Black or minority ethnic background, and children and young people. So for children and young people, that's a double whammy actually, because we know a lot of our children and young people in the Midlands area are more likely to be from a Black and minority ethnic background, are less likely to get an annual health check. And so we were really keen to think about what we might be able to do about that. So this year, we've really started to try and engage with our education and SEND partners to bring them around the table to think about the opportunity that there is within education to help improve the uptake of annual health check, but not just improve them, really to integrate them into our planning for and care and support for children and young people. So today, really, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about annual health checks themselves, and also talk a bit about the work we're doing. So far, the work's been very engaged in SEND, and so some of it might, and we haven't thought, and I know, you know, certainly Carol's been really talking about the importance of thinking about further education. So it'd be really good to get your thoughts about actually how we might better engage with children after they've left school, because transition is so important, as we all know. So I can't see any of you guys because I only got one screen. So do shout if you can't hear me, if you lose me or anything like that. It's really unnerving when you're looking at the presentation but you can't see the people. But I'll carry on until someone shouts otherwise. Fab, thank you. Right. So let me see. So to start with, I always like to kind of talk about why annual health checks are important. Because actually, for lots of people, annual health checks, you know, annual health checks are available for anyone over 40, but are available for people with a learning disability from the age of 14, and soon they will be available for autistic children and young people as well. But actually, quite a lot of us might think of them as what they're described as the MOT for health, a check-in to make sure we're all okay. But certainly for our the learning disability in autistic population, it is a lot more than just an MOT actually. Fundamentally, the reason why they were brought in was because we see them as an absolute vehicle to reduce premature death. And I flagged here some statistics, and I won't go through all of them because you're probably acutely aware of them, but they are absolutely about tackling health inequalities. So we know that people with a learning disability are likely to die much earlier than people without a learning disability, and the figures are pretty shocking, really. So, you know, 85% of people in the UK population died 65 or over. For people with a learning disability, that was 38%. And what we know also, certainly from information that we've been drawing from our reviews of death reviews for people with learning disability. So since 2017, we have quite an involved programme underway to review almost it's not all deaths, but all deaths that are referred through to the LEADER programme, to understand actually what the care of those individuals are like and the circumstances around those deaths. And from that, we know actually that half of those deaths at least are avoidable. And we can see also, because we've got quite a rich body of evidence now, that having an annual health check is significantly associated with, or not having one, sorry, is associated with the likelihood of dying. So we know that they actually work. We're seeing some trends there that prove that actually having an annual health check can prevent premature death. And I flagged there that actually we know from that information that people aged 18 to 24 are less likely to have an annual health check. And of course, we all know that the COVID pandemic has really shone a light on the reality of those health inequalities. So just really like to start with being, really clear and upfront about why annual health checks are so important. They are, for us, they are absolutely the vehicle, the cornerstone to tackling these health inequalities, to getting in there early. I've just flagged here, I will share the slides anyway, but I won't go through all of this. That's some more data really about what we're seeing from death reviews for children and young people as well. And, some of the real issues around, underlying issues around premature death are about delays in responding to signs of illness for children, poor multidisciplinary working, poor advanced care planning, and poor quality care actually. So what are annual health checks and why are they important? I guess, we all probably know what an annual health check is. So any individual aged 14 or over on the GP Learning Disability Register is eligible for an annual health check and should be invited to have one. And they are very much about making sure we're able to identify and treat medical conditions early. But they're a lot more than that. So for us, they are about establishing early on a relationship with the GP and engaging young people and their families in on their health. And I was reflecting on that first presentation actually about how are we really hearing and listening and engaging people in their health and well-being, because actually we know if people aren't physically and mentally well and feeling healthy, actually it's really difficult to get achieve all those other things that we need in life, you know, the education, the outcomes that we want to see. So annual health checks for us are very much, we want them to be much more than a one-off check-in, but a two-way ongoing interface with care planning or support for individuals. Just flagging here really in this slide, we do have data on a quite granular level, actually down to practice level, about who isn't getting an annual health check. I will flag an issue that this refers to only people who are on the register. So we absolutely know that there is also an issue about lots of children, young people not being on the register, full stop. So if you're not on the register, you're not getting in, essentially. But of those children, young people that are on the register, on the LD register with the GP practice, we can see there's quite a huge variation. And the bar to look at there is the red bar, because what that's telling us is what percentage aren't. And you can see in some areas, you know, it's as high as 51% of people on the LD register that aren't getting an annual health check. We know also that this is an issue that's been highlighted by SEND inspection. So my feedback from some of our from SEND colleagues has been that the uptake of annual health checks, the quality of them, the monitoring of them, and the kind of engagement with young people and their parents and carers about their experience of them is quite poor, and something we're minded that we need to do something about. Unfortunately, my colleague Zara Bowden, who coordinates the parent carer forums, isn't able to join us, but she has helpfully shared some slides actually about the kind of feedback that she's seeing from children, young people and parents and carers about annual health checks. And I thought it'd be just useful to share some of this insight, if I can make it work. Oh, her slides are a lot more whizzier than mine. So I guess, you know, what we know from that feedback is that when, you know, for some people, actually, the experience of annual health checks isn't great. So people find it scary, intimidating, it's not accessible. They're kind of confused about why they need to have an annual health check. You know, they've got lots of other appointments, and it feels very disconnected in terms of thinking about maybe, you know, the conversations they might be having around education, healthcare planning, and other SEND reviews or care planning more widely. It doesn't feel very joined up in terms of where it fits in all of that. But actually, when done well, it can be really great. It can be informative. It can be a way of opening up doors and starting a conversation about health and well-being more widely, and building those relationships actually with health professionals who, for many people, hopefully should be a continuous kind of relationship for them, and a really important one. So Zara's just fed back actually an individual family's experience, and she's referenced here Rachel and her son, and she talks about how, you know, Rachel, when she first was called for an annual health check, first of all it was called an autism check and then an asthma check. So the real kind of issues around and that. You know, about booking in an appointment, it being at 8:30, you know, for her school-age son. So again, you know, we need to think really carefully about how can we make these as accessible as possible. And then there's some really creative stuff happening in parts of the Midlands where we're linking into special schools to make that experience much more accessible. But really, for me today as well, it would be really helpful to understand actually what are the processes that we currently have in terms of further education that we're working and engaging with children and young people, and how can we direct them, engage them in a conversation about their health, and really use the annual health check process to enable that joined up conversation. You know, in this experience, staff members were unprepared, you know, and we do know that GPs don't necessarily really understand how best to communicate with people with a learning disability. We've heard that earlier on, how important that is, and get the best out that two-way dialogue. And it can be a scary experience. We're doing a lot of work around the quality of annual health checks. So once we get people in, we need to make sure that the conversation they're having and the engagement they're having is a good one. And that means that actually a lot of prep work before anyone even arrives at an annual health check. So for individuals themselves, families, GPs, you know, if, for example, you know, you're having conversations with children, young people and their families as part of their transition planning, the education planning, you know, it'd be great that GPs are aware of and engaged and understand actually where that young person is, so they can look at a young person's needs holistically actually, because a lot of the young people that we're talking about will have complex health needs, may also have mental health needs. So we need to make sure that we're going in prepared, but we also need to ensure that once they've had that check's good, but actually there's really good follow-up. So there's really good examples of, again, in some parts of the Midlands, whereby services are working with in and around the annual health check process to support good health and well-being, providing workshops around sexual awareness, a healthy weight, and other elements. So just here I've flagged a few other comments that families have, that Zara shared from families. You know, one of their LDA is saying, why does the system treat them like they're separate parts? And I think for me, that's really critical. I feel like we're still quite separate in the way we are thinking about and engaging with health and education. Lots of, you know, we already see a paediatrician, what and specialist, why do we need to bother? And that's also quite important, because actually what will happen is that actually when children, young people, when a child is, you know, under 16, I don't quite know the exact age actually, there should be quite joined up care through paediatricians, but actually when we know when they transition into adulthood, some of that is lost, and we can definitely lose some of that kind of coordinated support. So annual health checks are really important. So back in October, we hosted an event. We'd brought together colleagues, and Carol, you've been involved in that. So colleagues who are actually, it's an organic group of colleagues, I have to say, but really enthusiastic and engaged colleagues. So it's worked really well to start to help us think about how could we tap into and engage with our education and SEND partners better, to really get better ownership from them as well, and from health partners to really engage them in collectively working on this. And at that event, it was very much an introductory event to set the scene in terms of where we are, understanding of the issues, and to engage people in a conversation about what the opportunity might be here. And we did do a little survey, and what that showed actually is that, you know, I guess what we already know, there is limited involvement at the minute from SEND and educational partners in terms of engaging children and young people in annual health checks and in involvement in the annual health check programme. But what was great in terms of that event is we came away from that event, we did have another one of these kind of things, and asked people, what will you take away? And the really positive and response from colleagues about wanting to tap into and engage with and take up the mantle, really, in terms of improving the uptake of annual health checks, but really thinking about how they can better support a conversation around health as part of their wider planning. So we've agreed to host a further event, and we're planning one at the beginning of April now. And what we would like to do at that event is build on the last event, but really make that an event that's very practical. We're working up the feedback that we've had from the last event to work up a checklist, a framework, whatever we might call it, but a plan of sorts, really, to help colleagues in the education setting and SEND and health colleagues to come together and say, what are the 5 things that we might collectively do that might help us to improve and engage on the health and well-being of children and young people. And some of the things that we're talking about there are around how do we ensure that children and young people get an annual health check in the first place? So we know that we need to do more to get children and young people on the LD registers, because if you're not on that register, you're not going to get a check. So there's, you know, some practical things we could do, at least through the kind of SEND process, to flag annual health checks, which some do, but I think certainly the messaging that we were getting from our event was that there's lots of opportunities to do more of that. It's quite limited. But we also want to make sure that the annual health checks themselves are accessible and effective. And we know that we need to do a lot more work with primary care to make that experience as meaningful as possible. So that will be about making sure that we are able to communicate and engage with children and young people and their families effectively. And that's where I was thinking earlier in terms of how we might draw on some of that expertise that we're talking about, how we're really listening to children and young people. And so to make that personalised, how do we make the kind of health planning more holistic, and how do we build it into, I suppose, wider planning that we've got in terms of EHCPs and other things. But we also want to look at developing more creative approaches. So some of our systems are thinking about how they might build do clinics in schools for EHCPs. But I'd be keen and very open to understanding actually what opportunities there are as children, young people transition into further education to make that to be creative about how we might work with practices to support and engage with children, young people and their families into health checks. We're also interested in thinking about actually how we might support the implementation of this health plan. So it's no good at people going to get an annual health check if actually nothing follows from it. So again, we're quite interested in thinking about actually what is the local offer, how can we complement and support the EHC plan. So in some areas, I was talking to a colleague in Suffolk recently. They're doing some fantastic work with I forgot what they're called now, health facilitators essentially, and social prescribers, to say actually this is what you've worked up an annual health check plan here. How do we make that happen? How we might link into what's available locally, and that doesn't have to be very clinical. Actually, that really is about health and well-being. Healthy weight, for example, is a massive issue for us in terms of thinking about people with learning disability, particularly people who have complex conditions, because weight and poor managed weight is a real risk factor actually. For people who have epilepsy, it can really have an impact on their seizures and other things. So lots to think about there. And finally, I guess we would like to see around assurance that, where you might be looking at and monitoring, outcomes for children and young people, how do we build a monitoring of health and health outcomes into your monitoring, and how do we connect in to your assurance really in terms of thinking about actually when we're thinking about checking in on whether we're getting health outcomes right, we need to think of health outcomes linked to and more broadly holistically in terms of wider outcomes for care and education as well. So these are some of the things that I guess we are hoping to support and work with education partners on. And we are keen to think about how do we make that as easy for colleagues in the education settings to do that, and really open to hearing from you on that. This last slide is just some actual links. There's a huge wealth of resource actually out there on annual health checks. We've picked up a few here that you might find useful, and I just flagged those in case they're things that you might want to have a look at and share with colleagues. So that's all from me. Oh, I think you're on mute, Carol.
So I am. Thank you. Some people will be grateful, I'm sure. Okay, well, now we've got an echo, I think. Oh, it seems
we're okay.
Okay. Any questions? As always, I've got questions, but anybody got questions for Hafsa about the whole process? And I know she's got questions for you, but or any thoughts about how particularly primary care can work alongside further education for the 18+ group, but for the 16-17-year-olds who are transitioning into further education. Ruth, you've got your hand up, and I was thinking of you because you're at the Hive, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, so it's a funny coincidence, I'm pretty sure that I overheard a lesson going on the other day about annual health checks with a member of our staff trying to explain what they are to the students and help them to engage and understand. It would be lovely to have healthcare. I mean, we are very blessed at the Hive. We do have nursing staff on site, but it would be great to have someone from a GP surgery that actually does these checks to come and talk to the students. We love having guest speakers, and I think there's so much that could be got out of that kind of a link, maybe with our local surgery, something like that. I know that's something we can explore as well, but yeah, we love bringing guests into the college and making it more real experience for the learners, and they get sick of hearing our voices. But just from a personal note as well, I happen to have been at my son's annual health check last Friday, and it wasn't a great experience. I've got a really good relationship with the surgery, and we're up there a lot, and he's got very complex medical needs these days. But it was a nurse that delivered the assessment, and I just felt that she didn't really see the point in us being there, and I was sort of very keen. There's been a lot that's happened for him medically in the last year, and I was very keen that was very clear on the system. And I was sort of saying, well, have you got the latest on his hips, and have you got the latest on his foot? And she was sort of going into the files and then bringing up the letter, and that wasn't quite what I meant. You know, it was just, it kind of felt like, yeah, why are we here? Yes, he got weighed and he got measured, but he's having that done a lot anyway, because he's always in and out of hospital at the moment. So yeah, it very much felt like she didn't see the point of us really being there, and was quite quick to get us out the door. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I
really value you sharing that, because what we're doing this year is, and I do worry about the quality of annual health checks, simply because GPs are very pressured. So actually, when they're going in, sometimes they're very quick, and they should be a lot more.
I think when we've had a GP before that knew Nung and knew his history, and that makes such a difference. It's a much more, you know, I'm not saying that it needs to be a GP, it needs to be a nurse, but you know, whether that makes some difference in it, but certainly having that existing relationship, you had the feedback there of another person to explain the whole story over to again. And you know, she didn't even give me a chance to do that, but she certainly wasn't aware of his story and where he's at. So, but seeing a GP that we see regularly, you know, I don't have to do that then, and he kind of gets it.
Would you mind, Ruth, I mean, offline, sharing or confidentially or anonymously sharing your experience? Because we always value, I think, personal stories really help to bring it to life. And, you know, one of the things, because I'm not primary care by background, so I don't know how it plays out. And I'm so eager to understand, what does it look like when you arrive at surgery? And it would be good to get your thoughts, if you would like, and able to share what would have made a real difference.
No, it's a college. Yeah, of course. I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else got any questions for Hafsa? Just wanted to make a comment earlier in relation to what you were saying about weight, Hafsa. I mean, obviously, when people are thinking about weight at the moment, because there's such a, you know, a sort of burgeoning of obesity, particularly post-COVID, I heard something the other day that 4.5% increase in primary school children registered as obese, and that was in my neck of the woods. And I don't know what it's like nationally, but that's quite a significant increase just in the last 2 years. But when I was involved with the confidential inquiry into premature deaths, which was the forerunner to the National Mortality Review, or LEADER, I was really surprised that actually 22% of the people who died prematurely were underweight, significantly underweight, not just, you know, overweight. So there's something about ensuring people are getting the right balance of food, but also that they're able to absorb food, and I think sometimes that gets missed. So you know, sometimes people's mental health as well interferes with their patterns of eating, and you know, we sometimes miss that. We think somebody who's thin is actually likely to be okay. We focus on the overweight people rather than the underweight ones, and I remember being really very surprised at that. So but it was just something you mentioned about weight, and I thought,
but just on that, I mean, I guess then these are some of the areas where I think there are real opportunities for us to connect, because you know, so for example, we may have someone go to practice, get an annual health check, and that's why we say healthy weight, because we know that the real issues around being underweight as well as being overweight, and the risk factors associated with that. But my worry is, you know, I've been talking to our regional health improvement programs. So we've been talking about our regional programs responsible for healthy weight, and they've shared with us their way to look at whether or not it's accessible for people with a learning disability. And the fact is it's not. Because what a lot of it is around self-management, and that just wouldn't work really. But equally, there are lots of opportunities. Now, I had a recent conversation with someone from, is it Sport England or something like that, and I hadn't been aware of the level of resources there are actually tailored to support physical exercise and engagement, positive engagement for children and young people with a learning disability. And I don't know how cited, the local offers are of that. But I think there is something about how do we connect with colleges or the places where children and young people are to say, actually, how do we promote good, healthy weight? What can we do if someone's had an issue, the issue of weight raised in their plan? So what? And what will happen now? Usually what will happen is people might be referred to the healthy weight program. Now, those healthy weight programs are not accessible for people with disabilities. So we have to think about what is available and what is out there.
Yeah.
So I think it's in an area, actually, certainly, we know that for children and young people anyway, more widely, this is an issue. Whether or not, I'd be really keen to think about colleges and further education and how we can tap into things that are already happening or could be happening to support some of that.
Are there any other people who are on the call from colleges who have any thoughts about young people coming through into their courses? I can't see where people are on the whole.
I think we've got Ben Kovacs on, and we've got 2 colleges in Shropshire that are on the call, and I'm not sure if they want to contribute. If they would. Thanks,
Yeah.
Ben.
Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, no, she did, didn't she? Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You'll get me back.
Yeah. It's certainly not something that we've experienced in terms of the involvement from that perspective. I'm well aware of some of our more complex learners are involved with health, and but that's very much a standalone, separate entity. It's not something that we kind of get involved in. That's not to say that we wouldn't. We work alongside some of our students with epilepsy, and in terms of support and training and things like that, but even that seems to have changed in terms of what the offer has been over the last couple of years. So at one point it was very much coming in and supporting students and staff, but it's kind of gone a little bit more generic. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because that helps us be able to support a wider range of staff, and therefore if there is something more bespoke, they will come in and talk to our team for specific individuals. And then likewise with diabetes as well, and we've had some support from that perspective for some individual students as well, but it's certainly something that we don't do on a regular basis. But we don't have that many students with complex health needs. So.
Thank you. I think also what I would say in response to that, Ben, is that it's not necessarily just about the people with complex health needs. It's about a group of people who perhaps appear to be healthy but might have some underlying condition, and that's where the annual health check comes in. So there's something
absolutely.
about not understanding their eligibility.
Yeah.
I've just put in the chat a link to a document which is about it's a sort of checklist for annual reviews, and in it it's got a section on health, and one of the things that's very much at the forefront is the whole thing about, is the person registered with a GP? Did they know about their entitlement to an annual health check? So that it's part of the conversation at the review from year 9, which would be sort of 14 onwards. So it might be helpful to you just in terms of thinking about your own paperwork as well, whether or not you're including those things. I think actually we need to finish, but thank you so much, Hafsha, and I'm really sorry I can't do the 1st of April, so I need to talk to you about that, but
Okay.
let's have a conversation outside of today.
Thanks for the time. I'm going to have to dip off now, I'm afraid.
To hear what's going on, and I'm really glad that you're having such a programme to try and increase the number of annual health checks in the Midlands, so thank you for that. Sarah, did you want to add something?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things, obviously, with our officers, for those that would be eligible for an annual health check, we do ask them to ask the question at the annual reviews. I think that's important, and I'm sure that we amended our sort of annual review paperwork, so it's a prompted question as well. Carol, just on the other thing, you said that you put a link in, and I can't see it in the chat.
Oh, perhaps I didn't you know, I'm terrible about not pressing enter.
Perfect, it's there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was there, but I didn't let anybody see it. Not very handy.
That's brilliant.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I'm going to have to dip out for another meeting now, but thanks so much for having me today.
Oh, I'm delighted to have you with us.
Great, thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Right, so we're not doing too badly in terms of our agenda, getting, keeping to time and so on. And as you will appreciate, we always talk about those 4 pathways when we're talking about preparing for adulthood, and we never miss an opportunity to talk about employment. And we've got today Mary O'Shaughnessy from Cadent Gas with us, and Mary is going to be talking to you about some of the things that she has been involved with that have created opportunities for young people to get into work and to start apprenticeships and so on. So I'm delighted that Mary has just joined us. And I know, Mary, you're not going to be using slides, but you are going to be telling us about what you're up to.
And apologies because I'm in the car, because actually I've just come from an SEN provision this morning. I was asked at the last minute if I'd go in and speak to them about National Apprenticeship Week. So I'm literally driving back from that. But it's quite opportune because we're reviewing our programs at the moment, because traditionally we have done a structured work experience employability program at our centres in Hinckley and in our site in Anstey in Leicestershire. Now, coincidentally, we're moving and merging sites over this 12 months, and some of the young people that were with us previously, the feedback is that the schools have said that the restraint has tightened up on the internships, and therefore they weren't getting the number of young people through. So I took the opportunity to actually review the programme and say, what are we trying to achieve and for whom? And what became very clear, and I'm sure you obviously know it yourselves, is that the spectrum of young people can vary so widely. And what tends to happen is a lot of the time is we focus on what we can do for them or to them rather than what does an individual need. So what I've started to look at is, what are the barriers to a young person entering our workplace? Are there physical barriers? Are there practical barriers in terms of the National Apprenticeship Standard, where there is some provision for those who have a statement, but it's not necessarily enough for somebody who's not maybe academic full stop, and therefore they are being prevented from doing the sort of work that they would like to do because of the fact that they can't meet the threshold for an academic standard. So I've been taking that back and actually saying to a couple of different partners who are running programs, let's actually go in, identify the schools where the young people are attending. Let's go in and speak to them about who are Cadent Gas, what do we do, what are the type of jobs we have. Would you like to come on a meet the manager session, where we go in an online session first of all, and we do a little bit of a piece about what we do, what each of the jobs are. Then we're looking at a virtual tour of the site. So for somebody who might find that new environment different, is to get them to actually visit it virtually, and then get them actually to have a physical tour. And alongside is get them to experience the job itself, because somebody said is you can't envisage working in a call centre unless you've actually worked in there. So that is one of the areas we're looking at. Coincidentally, we also got one apprentice in particular, Niall, who has autism, who came to us on a training program, and the manager was like, well, how will we make him fit in with the business? I thought, well, actually, we need to look at how does the business fit in with him. So in Niall's case, we were lucky that we were able to, he had enough qualifications to be able to meet the apprenticeship threshold. And we put him on, well, he's on a supported apprenticeship, but there's no distinction between Niall's apprenticeship and anybody else's apart from the entry threshold. And Niall was quite clear that when he came in, he was now 18, he was now an adult. He did not want that additional support because he felt as though he'd moved on. So the support is still available. So that got me thinking, is we focus too much sometimes on what we perceive might be the problem. Instead of asking the young person, what would you like to do? Then looking at, are there logistical barriers in terms of, if it's an apprenticeship, are there barriers that would prevent us academically from accessing that? And if there is that job role available as a non-apprenticeship role? For example, our repair engineer, it's available as an apprenticeship, but it's also available as a direct entry repairmate. So let's actually say to the young person, why don't you come in and do that role as a direct entry? We'll support you over and above probably what we would do an adult learner, but you're still doing the same route. Likewise, if they want to be a gas engineer, they can do a level 3 plumbing at college and do the bolt-on. They're much more likely to be able to access that without the extra pressure of an apprenticeship. So the way forward, and I haven't presented this to our senior leadership team yet, but it is where I want to go with it, is that we actually identify the young people, be that 5, 10, 20 of them, understand what the opportunities are available within the business, and then understand on an individual basis what the access routes are. Is, do they need support through access to work? In which case, how can we arrange it? If they don't, what else do they need? And then that opens up a whole new avenue, but also allows them to opt in or out of extra provision. Because I find for a lot of young people, it's probably as they grow up, they want to move more into mainstream. And I think that should be their decision, but with the caveat that if they decide at any point they need additional support, that support is there. And from my perspective and from a colleague perspective, I think it then allows that conversation to take place. It says, look, this is not a big issue. This is possibly some minor adjustments. It's understanding the individual. It's understanding what that is within their comfort zone and what is not, and therefore identifying roles which we know are within their comfort zone. Because I think for me, a lot of the time that is, we envisage we know what the young person wants, we envisage we know what the barriers are. Actually, we have no idea. And I think from an employer perspective, it'll make it a lot easier if we have that open discussion that says, what would you like to do? Can you actually do that? For logistical reasons, are the barriers insurmountable, or actually they just minor tweaks? And if the barriers are insurmountable, then have a conversation with the young person which says, this is why you would not be able to do this role, or this is why we perceive you may not be able to do this role, but however, would you like to do some work experience on it? And that for me, I think, is the way forward. Is that hybrid model, is that where you're looking at how can we make it accessible, but at the same time as the individual has got the choice that says, look, if you try it and you don't like it, it's not the end of the world. We can look at other alternatives and how they'd fit in. And I just feel as there are more and more young people who have additional barriers to employment, and they're not, I mean, as I experienced this morning, where they were extremely high dependency, the young people, is we tend to put the same label on somebody. We think somebody's autistic, but there's so many different spectrums. And I think colleagues don't understand it. I don't understand it. So I think it's, for me, it's having that open conversation, saying to other employers, it's okay to ask. It's, none of us know all the answers. So if you're afraid, then speak to someone who can walk alongside you and help to support you, rather than say, actually, we'll completely avoid this because we're not up to the standard of doing it. And to me, that is, it's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of getting it wrong. it's the fear of being held to account if it goes wrong. So for me, it's that open conversation, and it's really is turning the whole thing on its head.
That sounds very inspiring. I mean, that it sounds like infinite flexibility there, Mary.
I think it's got to be. Everybody is struggling for staff at the moment. And again, we've got roles where they would suit someone at an entry level, and actually we need them to stay at entry level for a period of time. Whereas we get people who are coming in and they're constantly looking at the next step. So I was speaking to colleagues, we're constantly backfilling roles when in actual fact, there are probably people out there who'd be more than happy. Don't get me wrong, the jobs are decently paid, so they're not low wage. But somebody be happy to do that routine day in, day out. So I think it's just understanding is that role may have bits which wouldn't be suitable for somebody additionally. But if we were just to take those bits out and we could still have a substantive role, the cost for us in terms of not having to retrain somebody every 6 months would probably be far in excess of the intervention we've done.
Yeah, that's what the research shows as well, Mary. Yeah, productivity may be lower, but actually loyalty, reliability, you know, staying with it, actually more than repays the costs. So yeah.
And for us as a gas company, we're going into our communities. We want to represent our communities, and these people are all part of our communities. If they're behind, as our director always says, somebody behind that closed door who wants to work, but we're saying, well, actually, no, because you need this, that, and the other. We're putting barriers up there for people in our community. And especially with things like fuel poverty and digital poverty, etc. at the moment, I think there's a moral obligation for us to at least consider, it's not going to work in every case, but if we at least have the conversation and say we are open to discussion, then I think we're at a good starting point. And it might be that the person actually identifies the role they thought they wanted is not. It could also be they identify the fact that actually they can take on a lot more responsibility. They just never did so before because of the fear that they might overstretch themselves, or the fear that their support mechanism may be taken away if they were seen to be more capable than they were presenting initially.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So anybody got any questions for Mary? Again, you're a bit like Glenn, you made it sound so easy. You missed Glenn earlier, but he was talking about the 5-day offer and he made it sound like it was just, you know, something you just do. And actually other people struggle so much with some of the intricacies of this. But I'm like you know, I feel like with all the job vacancies that there are, and there are millions, I think it's 1.4 million, isn't it, currently, job vacancies, that we ought to be able to, well, we ought to be having a bonanza really in terms of getting young people into work. So Sarah.
Yeah, no, I find Mary's sort of comments really interesting actually, because this is very much a person-centered approach, and actually do these young people need that support, and it's about having those honest questions and sort of discussions with them, and it's quite interesting about when you're saying are barriers perceived, and I think that's quite interesting, and then it'd be really good to unpick, because ultimately it's what the young person wants to do. And as Carol said, if they've got that commitment, and you know, from your point of view as an employer, they're going to be loyal, you know, and you don't have to go out to recruitment. We've got perceived ideas that obviously this young person needs these qualifications or they need to do this, but actually that's not true. It's absolutely not true. So thank you for that, Mary. I find that really inspiring.
That's what I said. I mean, what we found with, I found with academic standards a lot of the time is I've always challenged them, because I understand learning institutions need to reach a certain standard, but if I need someone who needs to dig a hole, I don't need them to have 5 GCSEs. And for me, the frustration is I'm putting extra anxiety on someone to achieve something they don't need, they don't want. I don't need them to have it. And I feel as though it's my duty as an employer to say no, because they're not in a position to argue. Whereas I am as an employer, because I'm the one who's paying the bill, is say, actually, I don't want this. I will quite happily allow you not to provide this because I don't want it, they don't want it. And if they can do the job I'm employing them to do, then the rest to me is window dressing and I don't need it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
No.
Brilliant. I wish we heard that so much more often.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree, because I think we'd get more young people into work, and actually it also totally and utterly develops their independence.
It does, because I think I've learned from experience is you stand, I mean, it's almost like, I use the analogy of a child riding a bike with stabilizers. You stand behind, you're not going to let them fall off, but unless you allow them to start growing and developing, they're always going to be, there's always going to be that dependency. So you need to stand behind them, you need to be aware of the signs that something isn't quite right and that you need to jump back in and pull things back. But at the same time, if you keep overwhelming them, then they lose their independence, because there's always somebody doing something for and doing to them, I think, is the thing. It's, you know, we're not asking them if they want it, we're just doing it because we think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and we're too risk averse, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, we're a very safety driven culture, so we are very aware of safety. But I think in terms of behaviours, what I've said is, if you see someone's behaviour not right, call it out, because there's obviously something underlying. But that doesn't mean you stop them from doing this. There will be some things they can do quite capably, and other things you will see that by their behaviour, by the body language, they're not comfortable with. That's the time to say, is it okay? Would you like me to take it over? Would you like me to do it with you? But not just completely jump in every time that they might make a mistake, because nobody functions like that.
No, absolutely not. And this is, you know, we push sort of thinking outside the box and sort of job carving very much so, and that's just an example of it. So very interesting. Thank you, Mary.
No problem.
As always, Mary, inspiring stuff. So thank you very, very much for that. And we'll let you get on the rest of your journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so now we are at that time when we have an opportunity to get into group discussions. So we've got a very broad question for you, which is, how do we support young people to achieve a good life? You've heard lots of information this morning about different ways that people are working on that agenda. And I guess it's just an opportunity for you to, you know, talk about some of the things you've heard or some of the things that you're doing and share your experiences. So if you can come back with just a couple of points, that would be fantastic. And we've got 20 minutes for that. So Rebecca, would you mind putting us into rooms now?
Yeah, I'll get that going.
So Sarah and Eleanor are going to be
Yeah.
Hi, how are you doing?
You're good.
The numbers are reducing, but I think we got both groups back now, Rebecca? Are we all back together?
Yeah, all the rooms are closed now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so who wants to start? I'm looking at Sarah and Elle, because we agreed before, we got quite a lot on the agenda and that we would do the feeding back just to make it a bit quicker. But Elle, can I come to you first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really interesting discussion in our group. We had lots of different professionals there, so it really gave a really rich perspective. So some of the things we were saying about how we need to support children, we were talking about how to bring together care, education and health in a realistic and effective way. And I think the theme there was really about overcoming the bureaucracy and the divisions. And I think what was underpinning that in our discussion was flipping it round now. So we're all aware that we're working in a service-led method at the moment. Everything is like, well, you know, there's this route for this, there's this pathway for this, there's that system in place for that. And actually, when we flip it round and do this in a far more child-centred, person-centred way of hearing what they want to do, asking those questions from a really early point in their educational career of what their aspirations and their dreams are, and letting it grow from there, then the systems need to be adaptive and flexible to that. And so one example we spoke about was having more fully inclusive apprenticeships and utilising supported internships as much as possible as well, because they offer that flexibility for that young person to work in a way that suits them. Some of the barriers though, we were talking about how do we cope with the increased demand on our services and reduced services, reduced professionals, coping with the impact of COVID as well, and that actually what we need is to have that increased flexibility to respond to something that nobody saw coming, but it's had a huge impact on every child and young person and the path that they thought they were on, and yet it feels like services and provision is still quite rigid to, well, this was what it was like pre-COVID, so we need to stick to that and they need to catch up. So there was an interesting discussion around that as well. And then speaking about using effective and appropriate communication tools as well, what works best for that young person, not expecting them to communicate in the way that we communicate and that we need them to communicate, but actually going back to them and thinking and considering what works best for them and what's the most effective tool there. So there was lots of discussion, lots of other points I could bring in, but it felt to me like they were maybe some of our key ones.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, wow, you did have a wide-ranging discussion, didn't you? Yeah, brilliant. Sarah.
Yeah, hi. So obviously we went back really to the first one when we started with the Slido. What makes a person happy and how we obviously can achieve them to do a good life. Very much like Elle, very similar topics brought up. I think, you know, one of the 2 points I probably picked out is PFA has to be at a much earlier age, and I think that's what the group was saying. And actually we talked about harm by perceived need, actually, so that was quite a bit of a debate that we talked about, and it's about the resilience and about the young the children and young people having their voice. I mean, Gaynor actually said one of the things that she goes sometimes to annual reviews, and very often the child or the young person is not there. So this goes back being done too. So one of the things that actually we can do to support as professionals is actually challenge that and ensure that that young person is in that review, or their voice has been heard as part of that, because ultimately it's about their future. The other part that we can support as the young person is actually supporting the transition from the parents to the child or young person's voice in a more holistic way, rather than just waiting until you're 16. Oh well, legislation says now that it's the young person's voice. And also about going back again, supporting the presentations earlier about having the smarter outcomes, having the strategies for the young person to actually manage and enjoy their adult life. We did talk about bureaucracy again, as you did, so very similar sort of discussions, but it's basically about informed decisions and the voice of the young person being prominent in that from very early stages, which we know about. So it was really good to see that was coming out as key messages.
Thank you. And we had some of the same things. There were a couple of things that I particularly wanted to pick up on that we talked about. One of them was working with parents about how helping parents to understand that it is about standing back and letting their son or daughter experience things, and that's quite tricky. If you know, it can, for obvious reasons, it can be quite tricky, but it's about feeling that you're working together and you know, you're taking the risks together, and it's a shared responsibility. I think that was one of the things. But also we recognise that parents can be the real pioneers. You know, that some of the best things that have happened over the last 50 years have come about entirely because of parents driving them forward. And impact in Shropshire was mentioned. We had quite a lot of people from Shropshire in the group that I was with. So and Tina from North Staffordshire as well. So we also we heard then as well about the work that's been going on over the last 12 months in Shropshire about on the job experience, looking at community groups or businesses and what they need doing, and enabling young people to be part of that, and perhaps, you know, for college to respond, so that gets kind of flagged up, or we need some gardening doing, and then the gardener then helps by supporting the young people to learn how to do the gardening task that's, you know, required, and everybody benefits because it's direct work experience. So that's kind of less about the system, isn't it? It's more about you know, being seen in the community. It's about the community benefiting and contribution. So it's lots of good things there around that. So thank you very much. I think it sounds like you had some really good discussions. Rebecca, do you think we've got time to show that little video of Leah?
It's about 6 minutes, I think.
Okay. So Elle, I'm going to let you, I think I might let you do your summing up, and then we can, if people need to leave, we'll leave them with the evaluation and Leah. Okay, is that all right? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's fine with me. So yeah, just to sum up then, so thank you so much everybody for coming today and for your contributions. It's been such a rich discussion, which I think we've all really benefited from, so thank you. I'm going to start by saying a few thank yous. So thank you to all of our guest speakers. So we've had Kirsty, Catherine and Ben, we've had Glenn, we've had Hafsha and we've had Mary, and they've all given such interesting and rich presentations that we can tell that you've really put a lot of thought into. So thank you everybody. And then equally thank you to you, Carol, for pulling all of this together. You've invested so much in this series of 3 conferences, and to Rebecca for your support as well. In summary, I think what I've really taken away from today is how invested every single person that has attended today and contributed is about changing this round now, so that we're really focusing on what the person wants, what the young person wants, working with families, working with children, and having that as our centre point. And I think what I took particularly at the start from that Westminster was how you can do that as an organisation, as a system, and the Westminster School have clearly tried very hard to flip things around and have that invested and embedded across everything that they do. And I think one of the comments I made at the time was how they just started somewhere, because it can feel so daunting and so overwhelming, and yet they started somewhere and they're letting it organically grow from there and reviewing as they go along. I think another thing that I've really learned is about the bureaucracy that's in place, and how being systems led is putting up barriers, and that as professionals they're barriers that we need to acknowledge and really bring into the surface, so that we know what to do with those things and how we can overcome them as well. So there's some of the key things that I've really picked up on from today, and along with that restorative approach of how we work with children and families, and being really conscious of not doing things to them and not doing things for them as much as possible. So thank you everybody.